Hello and welcome to the ultimate guide to lesbian horror films and series. I'll be your host, Sapphic Screams, and I will be walking you through this ghoulish guide of homosexual horrors. Yes. Now, whether you're into spectral symbolism about unresolved trauma, predatory but attractive so they get a pass bloodsuckers, or homicidal maniacs with a penchant for Halloween attire, this guide has got something for you. Homosexuality, historically framed as something monstrous, predatory and sinful, means it has long been intertwined with the horror genre, often presented as one of society's many allegorical anxiety-inducing beasts in need of slaying. However, the dead lesbian syndrome is a prevalent cinematic trope across multiple genres, and despite horror's cutthroat reputation, it has in many ways evolved to have a more progressive portrayal of sapphic characters and relationships than most other genres who don't have the excuse of being horror. In fact, the lesbian representation in some of the entries in this guide might just creep up on you and take you by surprise. Now, enter this guide if you dare. If you're in the mood to be haunted by more than just your own existential dread this fall, then the 2018 Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House could be the perfect choice for you. It's the first entry in Mike Flanagan's The Haunting anthology series and is a modern reimagining of the Shirley Jackson novel of the same name. The Haunting of Hill House follows siblings who, as children, grew up in what would go on to become the most famous haunted house in the country. Now adults, they are forced back together in the face of tragedy and must finally confront the ghosts of their past. The sapphic subtext in the Shirley Jackson novel and the subsequent 1963 and 1999 on-screen adaptations of the novel has always been prevalent, but Flanagan's Netflix series is the first time the character of Theodora has been portrayed as openly and explicitly sapphic, which is just one of the many reasons to curl up and enjoy this psychologically and emotionally driven, fear-fueled series that goes far beyond your usual expectations of a horror story. And if one ghost story featuring a sapphic character wasn't enough for you, following The Haunting of Hill House, we have The Haunting of Bly Manor, a 2020 Netflix production and the second entry in Mike Flanagan's The Haunting anthology series. The Haunting of Bly Manor is about a young American woman, Dani, who moves to England to escape her past. She is eventually hired as an au pair for the children of the wealthy Wingrave family and quickly becomes subject to the paranormal happenings of Bly Manor. Similar to The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor is adapted from a piece of classic horror literature, and this time around it's the Henry James novel The Turn of the Screw. However, Bly Manor steers the horror elements in a rather more romantic direction than The Haunting of Hill House. Dani not only becomes subject to the paranormal happenings of Bly Manor, she also becomes subject to the affections of the Bly Manor gardener, Jamie, and a beautiful haunting love story unfolds between the two of them, which will leave you scared, swooning, and sobbing. No spoilers, all I'm saying is just have the tissues ready. Now, if sapphic romance of the supernatural persuasion speaks more to your soul, then the supernatural section of this guide is where you want to be. The first entry on our supernatural sapphic list is Jennifer's Body, a 2009 film which follows a demonically possessed high school student who kills her male classmates and devours their flesh in order to survive, with her childhood friend striving to end her killing spree. Okay, I know the marketing for this film makes it seem like it's a cheap horror flick directed at a vapid heteronormative audience, but if you're willing to look beyond the promotional hypersexualization of Megan Fox, you will find that this film is full of intelligent social commentary about two teenage girls who are struggling with their repressed desires for one another. Sure, one of them happens to be possessed by a horrifying demon, but honestly, between the horrifying demon and the repressed lesbian feelings for your best friend, the latter is much more terrifying. Source: Trust me, bro. Speaking of films that look like cheap horror flicks directed at a vapid heteronormative audience, the next entry in our supernatural section is the 2013 film All Cheerleaders Die, a film about a rebellious teen who convinces a group of cheerleaders to take down the captain of the football team. However, a supernatural problem soon arises and thrusts the young women into a new battle entirely. This film is essentially a campy horror that plays around with cliches. Whilst it's more explicitly sapphic than Jennifer's Body, it fails to capture that same level of intelligent satire and layered social commentary that gives Jennifer's Body a unique profundity within the usual cursory territory of horror comedy. That said, if you're just looking for some hard and fast entertainment with a rich mix of horror elements, complemented by bloodshed and cheerleading outfits, then this film might be the one you want to watch. And next on the supernatural menu we have Thelma, a 2017 film which tells the story of a sheltered young woman who discovers she has an inexplicable power that materializes when she feels desire for a female student at her university. And hey, we've all been there. Honestly, who's to say if we lesbians wouldn't use supernatural abilities for good, evil, or just for seducing women without their consent? Joachim Trier gives it his best guess, in the same way I gave pronouncing his name my best shot. If you're looking for an artistically experimental film which combines sexual repression with the supernatural, Thelma could be a good match for you. And finally, what lesbian horror guide would be complete without at least mentioning Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the hit supernatural series which follows the character of Buffy Summers as she tries to live a normal life in high school whilst embracing her responsibilities and destiny as a hunter of vampires and demons. Buffy has a place in this guide because whilst the series itself is not a lesbian one, it does contain a supernatural lesbian romance between the characters of Willow and Tara. Willow and Tara are a unique example of an on-screen early 2000s lesbian couple in the horror genre that weren't included for exploitation purposes and instead were intended as a serious portrayal of a lesbian relationship that developed from a genuine emotional connection between two women, effectively normalizing it. Of course, as most of us know, Willow and Tara didn't quite manage to escape all of the negative tropes attached to on-screen lesbianism, but that doesn't take away from the more progressive portrayal of their relationship and what it represented to begin with, not only within the horror genre, but in media as a whole. And as an added bonus, the series also contains sapphic subtext between the characters of Faith and Buffy. You know, just if you needed even more reasons to sit down and watch this iconic series. Of course, ghouls and demons aren't everyone's cup of lesbian horror tea, and if you like your sapphic brew with a spoonful of realism, then you might like the following entries in this true horror section. The first being Lizzie, a 2018 film based on the true story of Lizzie Borden, who was accused and acquitted of the axe murders of her father and stepmother in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1892. As a fun fact, the real Lizzie Borden was acquitted of the murders because the trial had an all-male jury, who just wouldn't believe a woman of her social standing would ever do such a thing. It turns out that never being taken seriously as a woman does have its advantages. Anyway, if maid costume Kristen Stewart taking part in a slow burn sapphic affair which culminates in a brutal climax is your kind of thing, this could be the film for you. Keeping in theme with parricide, next up we have the 1994 film Heavenly Creatures, production based on the notorious 1957 Parker Hume murder case in Christchurch, New Zealand. The film follows a young Pauline and Juliet as they bond over a love of fantasy and literature. However, as their relationship intensifies, they conspire to kill Pauline's mother when she tries to separate them. Similar to Lizzie, this film is very much a slow burn which builds up to a brutal climax, but horror elements aside, it also seeks to portray what led two young girls to commit such a chilling crime, creating an unexpected layer of empathy around them in its process. As a fun fact, the director of Heavenly Creatures, Peter Jackson, previously created camp horror films such as Bad Taste and Brain Dead, and you can see the influences of his earlier works shine through in Heavenly Creatures, creating some fun horror connections and parallels. It's all frightfully romantic. Heavenly Creatures was not the only lesbian true horror film to come out of 1994. The year also gave us Sister My Sister, a film based on a true incident in Le Mans, France in 1933 called the Papin murder case, where two sisters brutally murdered their employer and her daughter. The murder shocked the country and there was much speculation about the sisters, including allegations that they were having an incestuous lesbian affair. I'm beginning to sense a theme here with duos, maids and secret affairs that culminate in murder. Seems like a recipe for disaster, but also like a problem for those who can afford to have maids. So, Sister My Sister is a provocative film which challenges its audience to sit within the discomfort of a claustrophobic atmosphere simmering with pent-up hostilities and tensions, making it a uniquely disturbing watch. And to round off our true horror section, the next entry is perhaps the most prominent lesbian true horror film of all time, Monster. A 2003 film based on the life of serial killer Eileen Wuornos, a street prostitute who murdered 7 of her male clients between 1989 and 1990 and was executed in Florida in 2002. The horror elements of this film stem from its gritty portrayal of the dark realities of a system that disregards mental health issues, poverty, and rape culture, and how that turned a traumatized and desperate woman into one of America's most notorious serial killers and perceived monster. The stunning performances and attention to detail in this film work together to create a chilling portrait of a murderer that will stay with you long after the credits finish, making Monster an especially harrowing piece of true horror cinema. Now, if you prefer your lesbian horror flicks with a little more flair and theatrics, then this part of the guide is the place for you. And speaking of theatrics, the first 2 sapphic slasher flicks in this section of the guide are from perhaps the most iconic slasher franchise of them all, Scream. Scream 5, released in 2022, and Scream 6, released in 2023, both feature a sapphic character and a sapphic relationship, respectively, and are the first films in the franchise to do so. As a fun side note, Scream was also adapted into a television series in 2015, and its first season featured 2 openly sapphic characters, Audrey and Rachel, who were also portrayed to be in a relationship with each other. So technically, that was the very first piece of sapphic representation in the franchise, but it took place outside of the main movie installments. Whilst the sapphic representation in the television series isn't all bad, it's also largely sidelined. So that's something to keep in mind if you're specifically seeking out on-screen sapphic activity in your horror media. But anyway, back to the films. Scream 5 takes place 25 years after a streak of brutal murders shocked the quiet town of Woodsboro, where a new killer has donned the ghost face mask and begins targeting a group of teenagers to resurrect secrets from the town's deadly past. Scream 6 follows the 4 survivors of those Ghostface murders who leave Woodsboro behind for a fresh start in New York City. However, they soon find themselves in a fight for their lives when a new killer embarks on a bloody rampage. Now, many people will of course be familiar with the Scream film franchise since it first started 27 years ago in 1996, and everything that those films usually entail. Ghost mask, Courtney Cox's ever-changing hair, and long romantic talks on the phone. But the arrival of the multifaceted character of Mindy Meeks Martin and all of her less than subtle queer identity is certainly a sign of its evolution. The fact that Mindy is dealing with trauma that is not related to her sexuality alone means that Scream offers a fresh portrayal of an on-screen sapphic character who is fleshed out beyond her sexuality, which is not only unique in the horror genre, but in wider media as a whole. How long Mindy will be able to survive Ghostface is another question entirely. When it comes to murder, he believes in full equality. Speaking of iconic murderers, the next 2 sapphic horror films on our list are a part of another legendary horror franchise, Chucky. The first of these 2 films is Curse of Chucky, released in 2013, and the second of these 2 films is Cult of Chucky, released in 2017. The 6th and 7th installments in the Chucky film franchise. Curse of Chucky follows the character of Nika and her sister, brother-in-law and their daughter Alice, who visit Nika after her mother's death. However, horror strikes when Nika realizes that the doll Alice plays with is possessed, and Cult of Chucky follows Chucky as he returns to terrorize Nika, who is now confined to an asylum for the criminally insane. Now, Don Mancini has never been afraid to bring gay characters and gender-fluid dolls who look suspiciously like David Bowie into his films. But in The Curse of Chucky, he finally included a sapphic twist in his franchise for the first time, by showing an on-screen love affair between the characters of Jill and Barb. Very lesbian names. And he didn't stop there. Cult of Chucky also contains a bonus sapphic twist between bisexual icon Tiffany Valentine and Nika. Well, Chucky inside of Nika's body. Look, it's a long story involving a lot of souls transferring into various vessels, and you'll have to watch the entire film series to really understand what's going on. But in any case, I'm eternally grateful to Don for placing Jennifer Tilly back in a sapphic role. The sapphic chaos of Chucky also continues into the television series as well, and let's be honest, the more visuals of Jennifer Tilly committing both crime and lesbian activity, the merrier. Really, murderous bisexuals is just one element of many that makes Chucky such an incredibly addictive franchise, and one that has stood the test of time. So, if toxic, abusive, sapphic love affairs which involve murderous bisexuals, possession, kidnap, and Jennifer Tilly are your kind of thing, boy oh boy will you enjoy the Chucky franchise and all of its glorious gay madness. We love you, Don. Keeping in theme with murderers who dabble in the occult, next up we have the 2021 Fear Street Trilogy, based on the book series of the same name by R.L. Stine. Yes, the Goosebumps guy. The Fear Street Trilogy is about a teenager and her friends who, after a series of brutal slayings, take on an evil force that's plagued their notorious town for centuries. Now, the Fear Street Trilogy really stands out against not only all of the other entries in this lesbian horror guide, but the horror genre as a whole. This is because the trilogy largely revolves around sapphic protagonists who sit at the centre of the narrative, and it completely and unapologetically subverts almost all of the tropes and cliches surrounding sapphic characters and sapphic relationships in the horror genre. I can't say too much more without giving away spoilers, but if you like self-aware teen slashers with fun nods to 80s and 90s horror films, then the Fear Street Trilogy could be your kind of gal. It's like Stranger Things meets Scream meets Friday the 13th meets The Crucible. Well, you get the picture. And speaking of subverting lesbian tropes in horror, next we have the 2021 film The Retreat. The Retreat is about a lesbian couple who book a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods, only to be abducted and tortured by a mysterious figure who live streams gruesome killings of gay people on the internet for profit. In a similar vein to the Fear Street Trilogy, this film was created with the awareness of common tropes surrounding lesbian characters in horror films in mind, and it took steps to intentionally avoid them. The Retreat is a well-crafted production which utilises sapphic characters in an unconventional way that breathes fresh life into the worn corpse of conventional horror scenarios. And finally, to round off the slasher section of this guide, we have the 2003 French film High Tension. This film is about best friends Marie and Alexia who decide to spend a quiet night at Alexia's parents' secluded farmhouse. But on the night of their arrival, the girls' idyllic getaway turns into an endless night of horror. I can't say too much about this film or the lesbian elements in it without spoiling the plot, but if you're looking for a gore fest and a piece of work that's essentially a homage to 70s horror, complete with a very controversial twist that might leave you shouting at the screen, then this could be the film for you. But what if gatekeeping, girl bossing and gaslighting is more of your horror style? Not to worry, this section of the guide has you covered. First up, we have Dead Ringers, a 2023 Amazon Prime series about twin gynecologists Elliot and Beverly Mantle, who perform ethically questionable procedures on infertile women. This Amazon Prime series is based on the 1988 film of the same name, with Rachel Weisz playing the gender-swap dual role of the Mantle twins, a role originally played by Jeremy Irons. The series is a unique, gritty, experimental production which completely reframes the portrayal of the female body within the horror genre. Although a word of caution for those who are squeamish about blood, bodily fluids, and female biology. Perhaps don't watch this whilst eating breakfast like I did. I nearly passed out. Still, there's not much I wouldn't suffer through to see Rachel Weisz playing an on-screen sapphic. Speaking of unhinged medical practices, next on the list we have the 2020 Netflix series Ratched. The series is set in 1947 and follows the character of Mildred Ratched, who begins working as a nurse at a leading psychiatric hospital. As the series unfolds, the growing darkness lurking beneath her stylish exterior begins to show. For those who don't know, the character of Nurse Ratched is actually based on a character from the 1962 novel called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was also subsequently turned into a film of the same name in 1975. Sarah Paulson takes the character of Nurse Ratched and breathes new life into the role with her emotionally nuanced performance. And sure, Mildred and Gwen sharing oysters may sound promising in terms of sapphic romance, but we all know the real love affair is between Nurse Ratched and her Peach. Moving from peaches to performance, next up we have the 2010 film Black Swan. A film which follows Nina, a ballerina who gets the chance to play the White Swan, Princess Odette. However, she finds herself slipping into madness when Thomas, the artistic director, decides that Lily might fit the role better. And hey, what better way to deal with your competition than to blur the lines of reality and hallucinate sleeping with them? Especially if said competition looks like Mila Kunis. Black Swan explores the disturbing world of ballet, which with its extreme dieting, competitive atmosphere and heightened chance of injury from pushing your body to perform, is really a horror story all by itself. The added elements of insanity and destruction in the film cement it as a psychologically layered masterwork which portrays the disturbing consequences of pursuing perfection at all costs. Keeping in theme with psychologically layered productions, next on the list we have Jagged Mind, a 2023 film about a woman plagued by blackouts and strange visions, who discovers she's stuck in a series of time loops, possibly related to her new mysterious girlfriend. The best way to describe Jagged Mind is it's like if the L Word and an episode of Black Mirror had a baby. In other words, not only is it bizarrely fascinating, but everyone in it is so goddamn attractive. Jagged Mind is a production which explores the horrors of domestic abuse and the destructive nature of obsession through the occult. Billy and Alex's relationship certainly make Bet and Tina's seem like a bouquet of green flags in comparison. Next on the list we have the 2018 film The Perfection, a film about a troubled musical prodigy called Charlotte, who returns to a prestigious music school to find star pupil Lizzie has taken her place, and the pair end up embarking down a sinister path together. The Perfection is brimming with emotionally intelligent performances and a beautiful score, which serves to enhance all of its scenes, including those with sapphic activity, which is certainly an artistic choice I appreciated. The horror elements in this film are disturbing and equally as intense as its sapphic ones. This is a film you'll want to prepare yourself for. The next entry on this list is also from 2018, and it's What Keeps You Alive, a film about two women, Jackie and Jules, who are a couple celebrating their first anniversary at a secluded cabin in the woods. From the moment they arrive, something changes in Jules' normally loving wife, as Jackie begins to reveal a previously unknown dark side, all building up to a shocking revelation that will pit Jules against the woman she loves in a terrifying fight to survive. As a fun fact, Jackie and Jules were initially written as a heterosexual couple, but they ended up being changed to a lesbian one instead, making this film a unique contribution to lesbian horror cinema in the process. If you like suspenseful horror films with sudden left turns that subvert both the usual lesbian tropes and gender norms in the genre, What Keeps You Alive might just be the film for you. If you're after something a little more unusual, next on the list is the 2002 film May, about a teenage girl suffering from a vision development disorder who turns violent after being left heartbroken by two failed relationships. Okay, so this psychological horror is of the bisexual variety, but it certainly doesn't shy away from portraying the sapphic elements on screen, which is why I wanted to include it. Angela Bettis stands out in the lead role of May, providing a subtle and nuanced performance which elicits both sympathy and terror. The excellent casting in this film is essentially what carries it from beginning right up until its horrifying climax. And finally, we have the 2016 film Brides to Be, a film about Robin and Jenna, two women who are getting married. However, when they arrive at their secluded fairy tale venue, sinister forces besiege them, threatening to tear them apart. Brides to Be is a low-budget production which does struggle on a technical level, but nonetheless, it serves as both a horror and a lesbian love story, making it a fairly unique addition to this guide. You might want to save the date for this one. Still hungry for more lesbian horror, huh? Yellow Jackets could be the perfect thing to satiate your appetite. Yellow Jackets is a Showtime series set in 1996 about a New Jersey high school girls soccer team who travel to Seattle for a national tournament. While flying over Canada, their plane crashes deep in the wilderness, and the surviving team members are left stranded for 19 months. The series chronicles their attempts to stay alive as some of the team members are driven to cannibalism. And it also focuses on the lives of the survivors 25 years later, as the events of their ordeal continue to impact them. As a fun fact, there's a scene in season 2 where the girls are eating, for the sake of spoilers, I'll say somebody's corpse, and the corpse is in fact an edible dummy made out of jackfruit, rice paper and maple syrup. However, acting out the scene was so harrowing for some of the actors that they actually cried and threw up. Chef's kiss. Yellow Jackets boasts an impressive cast brimming with charisma, chemistry and comedic timing, making it a captivating piece of work. The incredible writing and cinematography is really just a bonus. This Showtime series is unapologetically ovaries to the wall, and its exploration of cannibalism, the occult and lesbian desire will leave you with a lot to digest. And finally, if you have a thing for predatory women who are only interested in you for what you have in the bank, the blood bank that is, then the following lesbian vampire films and series in this section might just quench your thirst. First on the list, we have the 2022 Netflix series First Kill, which follows the story of high school students Juliet and Calliope, a legacy vampire and a monster hunter respectively, who fall in love, even though their families work desperately to keep them apart. This series is essentially a supernatural sapphic Romeo and Juliet. So the pros to this Netflix series are that it stands out against a lot of other lesbian vampire media with its unique portrayal of its lesbian vampire character. First Kill doesn't vilify or treat Juliet's romantic desires for Calliope as predatory, nor does it associate her desire with something evil, which is a rare concept that allows the series to reshape the figure of the lesbian vampire within the horror genre, and subsequently create a more fresh and progressive narrative around her. And the chemistry between the two leads isn't all that bad either. The cons: some of the costumes in this series do look like they were taken from the discount Halloween aisle at your local grocery store. Next on the lesbian vampire list, we have The Hunger, a 1983 film which follows the gorgeous immortal vampire Miriam and her lover John, who she has led to believe will live alongside her forever. Unfortunately, John quickly deteriorates into a horrible living death, and Miriam seeks out a new companion in Sarah, a young scientist who quickly falls under Miriam's spell. However, Sarah doesn't warm up to the concept of vampirism easily, leading to conflict with Miriam. The Hunger is a tastefully dark and erotic visual masterpiece, which gives vampirism a fresh makeover, complete with sensational 80s fashion. The fact that Susan Sarandon and Catherine Deneuve have chemistry so intense it could fuel the electricity supply in a small town is simply just a bonus to this artistically divine production. Speaking of tastefully dark, next we have the 1971 Belgian film Daughters of Darkness. a film about a newlywed couple who encounter a mysterious and beautiful countess whilst passing through a vacation resort. Now, this film does shy away from showing anything explicit where lesbianism is concerned, and the erotic scenes are predominantly heterosexual, but it certainly doesn't shy away from portraying the fact that the Countess is without a shadow of a doubt an unapologetic evil sapphic seductress from beginning to end, and one who has an intensely mesmerising on-screen presence. In fact, the hypnotic charm of the Countess and her ruthless lesbian pursuits is reason alone to watch this curious product of the 70s. The next entry on this list is one from the Hollywood vaults, or should I say the Hollywood Crypt. Dracula's Daughter is a 1936 film about, well, Dracula's daughter and her mission to free herself of her vampiric thirst for blood. When her attempts fail, she turns to the psychiatrist Dr. Garth for assistance, but soon finds herself struggling with the desire to make him one of the undead as well. Now, both the vampiric and the lesbian elements in Dracula's Daughter are portrayed through suggestion, due to the less than progressive period in which it was created, but there's no mistaking the heavy sapphic subtext that stands out in this classic picture. Dracula's Daughter is also the first Hollywood film to portray a female vampire who preys on and desires female victims. So if you're interested in the history of vampiric on-screen representation or early depictions of lesbian desire in film, Dracula's Daughter is something you're going to want to watch. Keeping in theme with on-screen vampires derived from literary classics, the rest of the entries in this section are all adapted from the 1872 novella Carmela by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. So if lesbian vampires of the brooding variety are what you're craving, then you've arrived at the right destination. Styria, to be precise. Now, the first ever on-screen adaptation of the novella is the 1932 film Vampire. However, Vampire not only deviates quite a bit from the source material, but it also completely removes the lesbian elements from the book as well. So I'm mentioning it for the sake of informational purposes only and not as an official entry to this guide. No lesbians, no entry. The first proper on-screen adaptation of Carmela, which embraces the sapphic elements of the novella, is Blood and Roses, a 1960 film which follows Carmela, a young woman who is possessed by her vampire ancestor. Soon, her insatiable thirst for human blood begins to terrorise the inhabitants of the estate she resides in. This Italian adaptation is not only artistically impressive, but it completely embodies the essence of its source material, making it one of the better on-screen adaptations of Carmela to date. Blood and Roses was bold enough to portray a sapphic romance within the confines of what was acceptable to show at the time, and it's a romantic and tasteful visual delight which offers an intelligent retelling of a sapphic love story steeped in tragedy. Following Blood and Roses, we then have the 1963 Italian-Spanish film Terror in the Crypt, in which Count Karnstein comes to believe that his daughter Laura has become possessed by the spirit of the dead ancestor Carmela. He makes it his mission to find out more about this mysterious family curse and help put an end to it. Terror in the Crypt embodies much more of an eerie and gothic atmosphere than Blood and Roses. However, even taking the strict censorship of the time into consideration, the sapphic elements are a lot more stunted than they needed to be. With Terror in the Crypt focusing more on reinforcing heteronormativity than exploring the romantic sapphic themes from the novella. Still, the film is an interesting adaptation for those who are either a fan of the Carmela book or just looking for a vampire film which unfolds at a snail's pace. But if you'd rather swap subtle for salacious, then you might appreciate the next entry on this list, the Karnstein Trilogy, a series of lesbian vampire movies produced by Hammer Films in the 70s. And what this trilogy lacks in its ability to reflect the themes and essence of the Carmela novel, it makes up for with, well, breasts. The first film in the Karnstein trilogy is The Vampire Lovers, released in 1970 and set in 1794 Styria, where a lesbian vampire by the name of Countess Michala Karnstein wreaks havoc on the neighbourhood. The second film in the trilogy is Lust for a Vampire, released in 1971, which follows Michaela's descendant Carmela, where she adopts the name of her ancestor to seduce and murder her way through an exclusive girls' school. It's like a dark, loving Annabelle. And the third film in the trilogy is Twins of Evil, also released in 1971, which follows a pair of innocent twins who come under the influence of the evil Count Karnstein. In fact, the actors who play the twins in this film, Madeline and Mary Collinson, were also the very first twins to pose for the Playboy magazine. And I respect the hustle. As a fun fact, the director of The Vampire Lovers, Roy Ward Baker, claimed that after reading the Carmilla novella twice, he didn't get a sense of any lesbian content. Well, I guess the kissing and romantic declarations about being together forever as one even after death could be a sign of a good friendship. Historians everywhere are currently nodding in agreement. Okay, so the Karnstein trilogy isn't exactly sapphic high art, and what you see is really what you get. But from an entertainment perspective, if you're looking to watch something where you can just switch off, this trilogy is enjoyable enough. And like I said, what the films lack in depth and faithfulness to their source material, they make up for with female personality. Speaking of female personality, next on the list is The Blood-Splattered Bride, a 1972 Spanish film about newlywed Susan and her husband, who arrive at a hotel on their honeymoon. Soon after, Susan is haunted by visions of Michaela Karnstein, a centuries-old bride who was murdered by her husband. The Blood-Splattered Bride is like if a discount Daughters of Darkness and a discount Carmilla novella had a baby. And even with the discount aspect, it's still not quite as impressive a work as its parents. But still, it's a production rich in blood, artistic visuals, and erotic suggestion. And really, when watching a vampire film from the 70s, what more can you really ask for? Stepping into the 21st century, I will briefly and reluctantly mention the 2009 film Lesbian Vampire Killers in this section because, even though it's got to be one of the worst horror comedies in existence, it still features lesbian vampires as well as the character of Carmilla as its main antagonist, unfortunately making it a relevant addition to this section of the guide. The film follows two best friends who must become lesbian vampire killers in order to survive an ancient curse. Honestly speaking, the title of this film tells you everything you need to know about this particularly crass and cringeworthy Hammer horror parody. Yes! Moving on to the next Carmilla adaptation on this list, we have the 2014 film Styria, a modern retelling of the Carmilla novel which depicts the intense and fractured relationship between a troubled teenager and the beautiful stranger who befriends her. Styria is not the worst adaptation of Carmilla on this list, but it's certainly not the best. The relationship portrayed between Laura and Carmilla in this film leans more towards a friendship than a romance. This film was made in 2014, so it's not like they even have the excuse of censorship for the lack of romantic connection like the earlier adaptations do. So what was the reason? What was the point of making a film based on a book about a lesbian vampire and diminishing the romantic aspects? I hate it here. Anyway, the lack of romantic connection and general chemistry between the actors only adds to the overall insipid tone of this production. That said, Styria does offer some gritty and thoughtful visuals, and it does serve as a fresh alternative to the camp theatrics of the 70s Carmilla adaptations. Carmilla adaptations were clearly back in vogue in the 2010s because the next entry on this list is from 2019, and it's the film Carmilla, which follows the 15-year-old Lara who lives in total isolation in her family home. Struggling to find an outlet for her burgeoning sexuality, Lara is enchanted by the mysterious Carmilla, and the pair strike up a passionate relationship. The positives of this film are that it is an incredibly atmospheric and aesthetically pleasing piece. In fact, the cinematography is probably the film's strongest aspect. The negatives are the two-dimensional, clownish casting and awkward dialogue, which do leave something to be desired. However, within the context of Carmilla adaptations, if you prefer subtle and sobering to camp and garish, this could be your cup of tea. If at this point point, you've had your fill of Carmilla adaptations trying to out-tragedy each other and want an adaptation which brings something fresh to the table. Then buckle up, cream puffs, because you're in luck. The 2014 Carmela Web Series is a modern reimagining of the 1872 novella which follows Laura Hollis, a student at Silas University in Styria, Austria, who spends her time vlogging about her experiences. When her roommate goes missing after a party, a dark and brooding young woman named Carmilla is sent to take her place. Oh my god. And they were roommates. As a fun fact, the entire first season of the Carmela Web Series was filmed on an iPhone. But when you have a series that's brimming with such a charismatic cast and lightning in a bottle chemistry between the two leads, you soon forget all about the questionable production quality. The Carmela Web Series was so popular, it ended up with 3 seasons. Technically 4, but we pretend that season 0 doesn't exist on this channel. And it's the only adaptation of Sheridan Le Fanu's novella on this list to give Carmilla and her bae a happy ending. Finally bringing an end to the long list of dead undead Carmillas and traumatized Lauras that have plagued our screens for years. And it doesn't end there. As a bonus to the Carmela Web Series, we also have the Carmela Movie, where Laura and Carmilla enlist help from their old friends from Silas University to uncover a supernatural threat tied to Carmilla's past. I have to admit, the most horrifying part of this movie is undoubtedly the costumes and makeup. But as usual, the sparks flying between Laura and Carmilla work as both a distraction and compensation for any shortcomings this production might have. It was also very cool seeing a modern day Laura and Carmilla taken back to the gothic horror roots of the novella. And even cooler that a lot of the lines that Carmilla says in Laura's dreams in the film are taken directly from the book too. Thankfully, one thing the movie doesn't take from Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla is its tragic conclusion, instead giving Laura and Carmilla the happy ending that they've been waiting for since the 19th century. And considering the harrowing history of homosexuality and the horror genre, a lesbian happily ever after seems like a pertinent note to end this video on. Okay everyone, I hope you enjoyed this ghoulish guide to lesbian horror films and series. If you have any of your own lesbian horror film or series suggestions, please leave them down in the crypt below. And don't forget to subscribe for instant depravity.